Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you all today for Advancing Digital Transformation of the TOGAF Standard webinar, jointly hosted by the Open Group and AEA India. I am Karuna Krishna Malesh, Director of Membership and Market Development at the Open Group, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. It's a matter of immense pleasure and pride for us at the Open Group today to introduce the TOGAF Standard 10th edition in the region and talk about what's new and what's changed since the last version. I would like to begin by talking briefly about the Open Group. Open Group is a 25-year-old nonprofit global consortium with 890 member organization in over 50 countries. It leads the field in technology standard services, certification, research, and training. We seek to enable the achievement of business objectives by developing open, vendor-neutral technology standards and certifications. We work with customers and suppliers of technology products and services, along with the other standard organization to capture, clarify, and integrate current and emerging requirements, establish standard policies, and also share best practices. Our standards ensure openness, interoperability, and consensus. The Open Group Architecture Framework, which is famously known as the TOGAF, has been around since 1995. It helps organize the software development process in a way that reduces errors, helps hit deadlines, stay on budget, and align with key business units. Since its launch in 1995, the TOGAF 1.0 has gone through regular updation throughout the years to stay current with new approaches and developments in enterprise architecture and technology management. The last two editions, as some of you might be aware, the TOGAF 8 and 9, were launched in 2002 and 2009, respectively. The TOGAF Standard 10th edition was released last month on the 25th of April, marking a major milestone in the development of the world's most widely used enterprise architecture framework. Developed by the Open Group Architecture Forum, the release introduces a refreshed modular structure, which will make it easier to apply TOGAF framework to different kinds of organization and styles of architecture. Building over a period of 25 years of development and constant input from the forum's global community of EA thought leaders, the TOGAF Standard 10th edition expands the material available to architecture practitioners to adopt of best practices easier, right? It's making it more easier. The TOGAF Standard today, if you look at it, is being used by small, medium, and large commercial businesses, as well as government departments, non-government public organizations, and defense agencies. With greatly expanded guidance and how-to material, it enables organizations to operate in a more effective and efficient manner across broad range of use cases, including agile enterprise and digital transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, today's webinar will have three major segments. We will begin by hearing from the Association of Enterprise Architecture India chapter, and then followed by the deep dive into the standard itself, the newly launched 10th edition. And we also have a curated panel discussion on the adoption of TOGAF in the end user setting. We have lined up experts from the industry who will be providing us insights on how they've been using TOGAF in the respective industry and areas. Right? We will be having a last session for Q&A. I request all the attendees to reserve your questions for this section. We have planned about 15 to 20 minutes for this section. And I would recommend that you all post your questions only in the Q&A channel. Just a couple of housekeeping points. If you look at your bottom right corner next to the chat icon, there are three dots. So if you click on it, you will see a Q&A option as well. So during the last section of this webinar, you could post your questions there. You're free to post your questions even during the sessions, but we will be answering all of them at the end of the webinar. We'll try and answer as many as possible. Right. So let's begin today's webinar with the first session brought to you by the AEA India chapter. So started in 2007 in Burlington, Washington, the Association of Enterprise Architecture has been a beacon of knowledge sharing and community building within enterprise architecture globally. The AEA provides its members with credibility, recognition, and benefits of an international community of professionals. AEA India chapter in particular has about 7,000 individual members across pan-India. They have city chapters such as cities in like Bangalore, New Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Pune, Hyderabad, and also in Bhubaneswar. It's a vibrant community of practicing enterprise architects. AA India, through their 2022 charter, is committed to drive this EA community and collaborate with the Open Group on the TOGAF Standard 10th edition to drive further adoption of enterprise architecture standards. To learn more about this charter, today we have with us Tarun Gupta, who's the Management Committee member, AA India, and he's also the CTO for emerging markets at L&T Infotech. Along with him, we have Vikas Agrawal, Management Committee member, AA India. He's also founder of Nux Digital Consulting Partner and Nux Creators. Tarun and Vikas, it's over to you.
Thank you, Karuna. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. So happy to be here. I am Tarun Gupta and I have with me Vikas Agrawal. I am been associated with the Open Group, got TOGAF certified in 2009. And since then, I have been associated with AEA India as well as a part of Delhi chapter. And now it has been more than 10 years. So it's a great journey for me in person to be part of the Open Group community as well as the community. So I'm currently working with L&T Infotech as a Chief Technology Officer for emerging market, still practicing architecture and looking for this TOGAF 10 edition, which is giving a lot of excitement to us in terms of its evolution. Vikas, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sorry, I was speaking on mute. My bad. Thank you, Tarun. And my name is Vikas Agrawal, and I'm a management committee member with Association of Enterprise Architects India. I've been active practicing member for several years now, and with a vision to promote adoption of architecture standards launched by the Open Group. We are here, and with my experience, I would like to, contribute and try to answer questions on how AEA as an association of architects and the Open Group and our newest version of the standard would be able to, spread the awareness further, increase the knowledge sharing better. And with that, I would hand it over to Tarun again.
Yeah, so let's go through the journey of how we have grown in AEA India. So we have a vibrant community of 7,000 active AEA members out of 12,000 TOGAF certified members. So this community is growing, and we are one of the largest community across the world. And we see a big demand in the Indian IT sectors, especially in the public and private sectors. So we see with the advancement of technologies and new frameworks, new updates coming in the industry and new digital technologies. So AEA has an important role to play in bringing the community together and grow together. So this is the agenda. This is the objective of AEA India as well, to keep the EA community of Indian practicing architects together and drive that community towards the growth path. Yeah, so what we have done in the past few years, because you can go to next slide. Yeah, sorry, before, yeah. So what we have done in the overall last few years during the lockdown, we still continued our virtual conferences, workshops, knowledge sharing sessions across various speakers have come from India geography as well as outside to share their knowledge of TOGAF and other architecture frameworks they have followed in practice, and this has helped us stay in touch and collaborate further. And also during those times also we have published a newsletter, all the activities, and we also recently in the past few months we could sit together and drive a new ways how we can address the changing needs of enterprise architects. But still, we believe whatever we have done in the past has to change. So I would like Vikas to share with us how we have taken this new dimension. The way TOGAF 10 has come with a new edition, we also thought of creating a new charter for us with the changing time. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So, see, we have been noticing that there are, despite having done so many activities, performing, conducting so many workshops, knowledge sharing sessions, etc., we still notice there are certain symptoms which indicate that there is something that needs to be done. There were certain symptoms that were noticed. For example, when we organized community events, then there was a little bit of a lower turnout than we would have expected. Then fairly limited contribution in terms of knowledge by practicing architects. These architects are fairly knowledgeable people, and they know their stuff. They are contributing to their profession pretty well, but not to the community in general. Also, awareness about enterprise architecture as a subject, the open group, the standards, that seem to not have been pervaded well enough. I mean, to the extent that we would appreciate in the technology industry itself. Also, in the academia, we see, fairly limited focus because if you don't learn things as a student, then it sometimes we see that people fail to realize the potential of that subject until pretty late in their career. Yeah, so these are few symptoms that we noticed, and then we decided to really find out the root causes. We conducted several workshops with various chapters of Association of Enterprise Architects within India. We understood several personas, their fears, their motivations, what drives them, and why they would or would not want to contribute. And again, we came to the same conclusion that we started with. The hypothesis was found to be true, which is it all revolves around the singular member, which is essentially the fundamental building block of this community. Okay. And having said community, I would also accentuate here that this knowledge addition with the launch of TOGAF 10, that gives a significant boost to why people would really want to go forward and become more cohesive. To understand that, what we did was like I said, we conducted several webinars, etc., workshops, and focus groups and surveys. We found out there were several things that the objectives of an architect revolved around. So there were, as you can see on the slide, that there are learning goals, rewards and growth, personal and social objectives, organizational objectives, and of course, the recognition. If you see here, one of the key themes that we see, and that's the reason why we kept learning at the top, that all of this is revolving around learning. What standards we create, what knowledge we use at our profession, that is all related to what skill we gain, what knowledge we gain. And at such times, addition of TOGAF 10, which introduces agility to enterprise architecture, I think that's something which is a great addition now, and it helps us propel the learning objectives much better. With that said, based on after understanding of these objectives for a member, we actually went ahead and created a charter which will have its own resultant in form of a roadmap. So I will let Tarun speak about the charter, which is here on the slide.
Yeah, so based on this exercise, we found out there are multiple themes on which we need to drive this initiative along with learning, foundation, collaboration. So what we have done as a part of AE India, we have a management committee, which is now we are also adding few more members to make it more vibrant and more widespread. And we are also, as you can see, Vikas is from a startup industry or which is a growing industry in India. So we have like that academician also joining our group. So we believe as a part of the new charter, first we are setting up a new management committee and ensuring that these initiatives are taken up by function heads. Second thing is there will be series of events already have engaged a leadership program of Open Group as a work group. The second thing is with industry, we are all practicing architects. Most of our community members are practicing architecture. So they are working with their own units, their own industry, their own. And we also believe that for the cause of the standards, what we have seen till now, this community also will help us grow the community for architecture. Thing is, the collaboration is the key. So what we believe is the people who are part of, who have not joined the city chapters, would recommend them to keep joining our group, and we want to drive this as a collaborative community. Every individual has a role to play. So there are a lot of events we have lined up. Vikas, would you like to take it up, the list of activities?
Sure. Yeah. So on the screen that you see, you have a list of several activities which involve as many community members as we can have. The key idea is that we want to grow the adoption of enterprise architecture as a discipline. Now, to do that, AEA, the open group, we all need to join hands, and we would like to have as many members, as many on the board, on the forum with us. And to support these activities, we are planning to conduct several webinars and knowledge sessions so that the subjects related to TOGAF, subject related to digital transformation, agility, enterprise architecture in general, cloud architecture, and so many other subjects can be brought on and be spoken about. Then to make sure that we are meeting some of these objectives, we plan to do annual events such as conclave, conferences. We also solicit white papers, articles, case studies from the members and from the member organizations. And we would like to have a framework of recognition soon enough. Then publications, we already do it, but we want to do it even better at a better frequency, that we publish meaningful newsletters which really make sense in delivering the knowledge. Also, we want to have our ways into overall academic ecosystem within the country, so that enterprise architecture can be understood as a formal subject, can be considered a discipline of learning by the universities for the budding architects right from when they are younger. Also, we are planning to expand our collaborations with the various other organizations, including the open group, but CIO, PMI, CSI, IEEE, AIMA, etc. And of course, for all this to happen and for all this to take effect, we need to be little more present on various channels, including the internet. And we need to ensure that we provide a greater user experience to our members, to everybody who learns about all things enterprise architecture. So we would be working on, several tools, social campaigns, promotional campaigns, and working on the website. Now, with that said, we also would like to keep our hands totally in the thick of TOGAF 10, which is indeed a great addition to an architect's tool set. So now I would really invite all the architects to collaborate and grow the community, grow themselves in terms of their personal and professional lives. And how you can do that is by becoming a global AEA member. Here on the slide deck, you have the link. These links can be posted later as well. If you have any questions related to the role of AEA, how you can join, and anything else related to Association of Enterprise Architecture, Please shoot us an email on mine or Tarun's email addresses right on your screen. We have a social presence, which we plan to expand further. We are available on LinkedIn, on the LinkedIn group that you have the link to on the screen, and we are available on Telegram as well. So with that, I would hand it over to Karuna.
Great. Thank you so much, Tarun and Vikas. This was quite an interesting presentation and learn about what AEA India is planning to do. I also have to mention that you've been doing some fantastic work in terms of supporting the AEA India and your community itself. And I think one thing that I got away from your presentation is that the aspect you are trying to develop your AEA member, looking at the 5 different aspects. So learning, rewards and growth, personal and social objectives, organizational objectives, and recognition. So that's fantastic. And I hope with your support, we'll be able to reach out to the wider community in India. Thank you. Right, so moving ahead, ladies and gentlemen, the session we all have been waiting for, the newly launched TOGAF Standard 10th edition. We have with us Chris Ford. He's based in Shanghai, China. He's the general manager for Asia Pacific. Chris is responsible for business functions in the region. As a vice president, enterprise architecture, he also has a global responsibility for enterprise architecture activities in the Open Group, including the TOGAF Standard and the Archimate modeling language. Chris, I open the floor to you, so all yours.
Thanks, Karuna. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I better share my content, I suppose, so we can do that. Hold on a second here. And we're going to go to screen 2, and we're going to share that. Okie doke. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can, Chris.
All right. So there's 2 things I'd like to add to what Karuna's very nice introduction there. Along with my Open Group responsibilities, I'm also CEO of the Association of Enterprise Architects globally. So it's really a delight to see what's going on at a national and a city level in India. What you folks are doing is tremendous, and I commend the team there. Also, in addition to my responsibility at the Open Group for TOGAF and Archimate, we've recently moved the Open Agile Architecture Standard into the Architecture Forum. So TOGAF, Archimate, and Open Agile Architecture are also in the portfolio of my responsibilities. Now, the topic for today's presentation is the TOGAF Standard 10th edition, and we recently launched that at our London conference event, April 25th, 2022, and by we here I'm referring to the Open Group. Let me just get this going right. Okay. So what's new in the edition? Well, our agenda is revolving around an increasingly modular structure, substantially expanded content, and the expanded content includes domain-specific materials, which we'll get into later. Now, the updated document structure and the extended content focuses on what most practitioners want and what practitioners both from the AEA, the marketplace in general, and member practitioners within the Open Group have told us they want. That is more, better, and topical guidance on how to deliver the best enterprise architecture that supports their stakeholders and their organizations. Now, how do we make the TOGAF standard or any standard that the Open Group publishes? All of the activities of the Open Group are member driven. That means that our business model operates around organizations, and those organizations provide experienced subject matter experts to the Open Group. And those SMEs develop in a consensus-based manner the standards such as TOGAF, following the Open Group standards process. And the standard is developed by practitioners who are within the member organizations of the Architecture Forum. Now, when appropriate, it's necessary for the architecture forum to collaborate with other forum areas such as domain specifics around security or healthcare or whatever. And we use a vehicle that the Open Group refers to as working groups for that. Now, a very significant working group that's actually being operated by our colleagues in India, led by Dr. Saha, is the Government EA Working Group. And that working group is open to all forum membership, not just architecture. And I would encourage you to look into the other areas of activity through the Open Group website. So currently we have about a dozen or so TOGAF specific related pipeline activities underway. Those activities are in addition to the 20 series guides that we announced and as are available now as part of the 10th edition. So my point here is that although we launched something 2 weeks ago, we have a pipeline and a backlog of activities and that there is work going on. And to paraphrase Mick Adams, a current co-chair of the Architecture Forum, he said that this is the busiest, most consequential, and most productive time he has seen during his involvement with the Open Group and with TOGAF. So what is the standard? It's an EA framework that contains a methodology. It's developed by and for practitioners to architect based on best practices, and it's used by the world's leading organizations to simultaneously transform their business models and operating models, or to improve operational efficiency in the status quo. It's comprehensive, it's modular, and it's configurable. Looking at the modular structure that I've referenced here, it focuses on what architects want, that is more, better, and topical guidance on how to deliver the EAs, as I said before, the enterprise architecture outputs. And I mentioned stakeholders and organizations before, but if you're in a consulting business, that obviously includes your clients. Now, not fully represented on this slide, but referenced here in the top right corner, is the Open Group library, which contains TOGAF and other standards material, such as from the security, healthcare, commercial aviation, banking, process automation, trusted technology, IT for IT spaces, okay? Our focus is on the TOGAF library in this slide, and within the TOGAF Standard 10th edition, there are two major chunks of the edition. That's the fundamental content over here, and the series guide summary groupings over here. Now, the fundamental content should be relatively stable and enduring, and the series guides will be more dynamic or fluid in terms of changes to the published ones and in the addition of guides, series guides moving forward. Now, on the right of the TOGAF library, related to but outside of the standard itself, you'll find other guides, white papers, tools, webinars, presentations, videos, and publications in PDF and physical book form. And this area, although it's not within the standard, is extremely important, and I'll illustrate why later. For this edition of the TOGAF standard, there are 3 formats of content available to you. Here we have representative HTML format, PDFs, and printed book formats. So I want to spend a moment on continuity. It's easy to get lost in the kind of the new messages, right? The core character of the TOGAF standard is retained. You will find catalogs, diagrams, and matrices, the architecture development method, iteration around that, the enterprise segment and capability partitioning previously in the core of the standard and carried over in the fundamental content. There's impactful change in the fundamental content, though. It is revised and reorganized and now is made up of 6 areas. Okay, and in the center of this diagram, you'll see the six components, right? You have the introduction and core concepts, you have the architecture development method, ADM techniques, applying the ADM, architecture content, and the EA capability and governance context. So if you like statistics in terms of words, in terms of what we manage and edit, 58% of the fundamental content is unchanged, 12% is updated, and 30% is added. For example, we've put in anchors to the series guides that have been established and published. Impactful change related to the series guides, as I mentioned, we've got 20 currently. The series guides give advice on how to configure and at times extend the TOGAF fundamental content, and give guidance on suitability to a specific context. A range of topics are covered, okay? Offering how-to and domain-specific guidance. So this is the laundry list, and we'll just get into a grouping view of things here shortly. In terms of the extended guidance in the TOGAF series guides, we have general how-to related to a practitioner's approach to developing an EA following the ADM, digital technology adoption, a guide for readiness assessment and roadmap development, and using the TOGAF standard in the digital enterprise. Some domain specifics revolve around BA, security architectures, data and information architecture, and agile methods. So reversing that list, enabling EA agility, applying the TOGAF ADM using sprints, customer master data management and information architecture, integrating risk and security with the TOGAF EA, and then models, capabilities, value streams, information mapping, and organization mapping in the business architecture space. Now, the guides, again, are aimed at topics and concerns and use cases that our practitioners have said they wanted dealt with in the current release. Continuing with this idea of extended guidance in the series guides, we've also got an area for reference models and methods. And that revolves around things like the digital business reference model, a government reference model, architecture maturity models, project management, and the skills framework. For the previous slide and this half of the slide here, we've been really focused on kind of practitioner-oriented materials. But there are leaders or practice leads for EA in some organizations, and there are certainly sponsors for architecture in organizations as a whole, whether they are on the business or technologies area of the organization. And for those folks, there's a leader's guide. Let me get back up here. There's a leader's guide that deals with how to establish and evolve an EA capability in the context of your organization. And by organization, I mean your enterprise, right? It's a very, very valuable document. Of course, I'm going to say that about all the stuff that there's truth in those words. Okay. So getting started, where would you look to orient yourself on the 10th edition? This white paper is a starting point. It's an introduction to the TOGAF Standard 10th edition. It's available as a PDF, and the content is written to three audiences: practitioners, the leaders of EA teams, and the sponsors of EA teams. The assertion is that stakeholders, implementers, planners, customers, and other consumers of EA outputs are rarely directly involved with the customization or the TOGAF standard itself. They're really interested in the outputs of architecture activities for the purpose of guiding their decision-making and governing the changes of transformations. So the content of the white paper explains the motivation for and substance of the revisions in the 10th edition and includes recommendations on how to start using the 10th edition. The appendix for this white paper also gives detailed release notes on changes to the fundamental content. Going back to the formats here, the digital edition available in HTML is available online and navigable from the landing page illustrated here. I've circled in red here in the first column the getting started on what's new material that leads you down into the white paper. okay? But in the second column, you begin to look at specific content organized around a practitioner's view or EA content or domain-specific guidance and so on in terms of this navigation pane. Now, the intent here is to bring together the fundamental content and the series guides and to make it easier to navigate and search across that material. There's a lot of cross-linking in here, and to evolve continuously as we expand and refresh the content of the standard through this dynamic environment. Now, of course, you can still download the PDF bundles and order the paper books and use those formats in any combination you wish in order to get your work done and in order to learn, okay? Now, a very important feature available to you via the digital edition is the ability to provide feedback on any part of the TOGAF standard. So as you go down into the content, eventually you're going to get to some text or some diagrams or whatever, and you can click on the icons there that are, sort of indicating comments or bugs, and then that'll launch a form for you to provide direct feedback into the standard and the guides, okay? This is very important because it will rapidly extend our ability to curate and triage and deal with recommendations on errata and also on what you would like to see or you may or may not agree with in the standard, right? And our main request is that you be as specific as possible in your feedback. Generic comments are fine, but for it to be actionable is important for us as custodians of the standards. So I referred earlier to things that are outside the standard and why that content is really important. So important EA content permeates the Open Group library, okay? This content exists in the library and it's not a part of the TOGAF standard specifically. And I want to draw your attention to a few things in this example. Here we've got a guide document, not a TOGAF series guide, but a guide document on how to use the Archimate modeling language to support the TOGAF standard. This document was published simultaneously with the 10th edition, but it's not a part of the standard. It's extraordinarily useful to practitioners. The document compares and contrasts the current 10th edition with the Archimate standard and proposes example models in Archimate notation of TOGAF. Now I've extracted here examples of the enterprise continuum and the ADM represented in Archimate. And there's also a comparative analysis of the relevant components of the standard, including pointing out what might be considered for update or consideration in future inclusion in the standards. Beyond the text, because of the models that are done in Archimate notation, and they're available for you to use and customize for your own organization, you can do this by accessing them through the Open Group's Archimate Exchange file format and import them into any EA tool supporting that Exchange file format. So one of the missions that we set for ourselves is to increasingly roll out the use of Archimate notation across our standards and to deliver models of materials in the standards, not just text, and that to act as a vehicle for you to make that material available for customization, reference, and modification in the tooling that you use in your day-to-day work. Now, there are many other examples of useful materials in the Open Group library generally and the TOGAF library for you to use. This is just one example, so I strongly encourage you to go through the available material. For example, I didn't mention in the list of reference guides, reference models, the microservices architecture guide. But there was a presentation by the Open Group of the authors of that particular guide in the Toolkit Tuesday presentations leading up to the launch. And so having the guide, the models in the guide, the video and the presentations as an environment for you to understand what the purpose and intent is and examples and hear the authors speak is also available to you through the library. Now, looking ahead, in terms of content, more TOGAF Series Guides in development, more supporting content like I just described with the TOGAF and Archimate guide, more frequent updates to the TOGAF Standard, and innovative ways to access and adapt the standard as we continue to improve on the digital edition. Looking ahead in terms of certification, there was a question in the channel. I'm going to try and answer that here with this portion of the presentation. Information on additions to the certification portfolio to incorporate the TOGAF Standard 10th edition will be announced in the coming months. But TOGAF 9 is not deprecated. It continues to be available. In fact, the TOGAF landing page has both the 9.2 edition and the 10th edition on it, and you have to then click down into whichever one you're particularly interested in. There are direct links to both of those, by the way, as well. So if you are engaged in studying or taking training or have budget for TOGAF currently, you can feel comfortable to go ahead, take that training, study and take the exam, because what is announced about the 10th edition is that we will include a bridge learning path for TOGAF 9 certified individuals that covers the new features in the TOGAF Standard 10th edition. So your learning will not be wasted and your money will not be wasted, and you will have a bridge to take you from 9 certification to 10. That essentially was what I had to cover here today. If there are any questions, there is a list of email addresses on the left of this slide, which is the portfolio team for architecture reporting to me, including myself, Mark, Dan, Kelly, and there's a couple of links on this slide here also, which you can easily search TOGAF and the 10th edition from the Open Group's homepage. That's pretty much what I had to cover here today, Karuna. I hope the audio and video stayed in place. And thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me. And I look forward to engaging in the Q&A later.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much for your insight and the deep dive into the standard itself. We will be making this deck available as part of the post-event proceedings. So everyone will be receiving a copy of that, right? So if I have to wrap up, right, the major takeaways from the news edition is, so it's modular structure, it has expanded content, and it has domain-specific guidance. So it builds on to the previous edition, expanding the guidance available to architecture practitioners to make the adoption more easier. And it's organized into TOGAF Fundamental Content and TOGAF Series Guides. So the fundamental content provides the core concepts and practices, while the series guides covers pragmatic best practices on the topical priorities. And it also would help, I mean, if anybody is wanting to do the TOGAF 9, they can go ahead and do it, because we're going to be providing a bridging learning path to go to the 10th edition. So I hope that helps. So wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris, again. So ladies and gentlemen, now we come to the last edition of this webinar, which is a panel discussion. The panel discussion is about insights on TOGAF adoption and benefits from EA in end user setting. In this section, we will hear leaders from the end user tell us their story about how they have set up their own internal EA practice and how has the adoption of TOGAF benefited them. It's my honor to introduce you the distinguished panelists here. The session will be moderated by Dr. Pallab Saha, who is the General Manager for the Open Group India. He also holds many hats. He is the President for Association of Enterprise Architecture India Chapter. He is also the Senior Lead Expert in Enterprise Architecture within the National E-Governance Department under the Ministry of IT and Technology. And from our very own Indian Railways, we have Mr. Sharat Sahai Mathur, who is the General Manager IT, Center for Railway Information System. He joined Indian Railways as a mechanical engineer in 1986, and over a period of 3 decades, he has worked in various teams and departments and has headed many IT projects within the railways. He was also part of the team that worked on the computer integrated manufacturing, which is famously known within Indian Railways as CIM project. He was also the director which was involved in formulating the IT policy for the Indian Railways, apart from conceptualizing, initiating, and monitoring enterprise-wide IT projects. Welcome, sir. And from the oil and gas industry, we have Mr. Tiju Francis from Shell. He's the lead delivery architect for downstream portfolio. He leads a team of over 200 solution and data architects who are spread across the globe, working for various lines of businesses of downstream, providing architecture solution. And Tiju himself comes with over 24 years of experience in software architecture, IT delivery, and program management. We have from one of the conglomerates and one of our platinum member, Mr. Stanley Johnson from Royal Philips. He's a senior enterprise architecture. He has over 25 years of IT experience engaging in large-scale business and IT transformation projects. He has over 13 years of experience working as an enterprise architect in global CIO organization. He has worked mostly around enterprise architecture practices, developed strategic target architecture, reference architecture, and has engaged and steered solution towards the target state. With that, I would like to pass it on to Dr. Saha to take over the discussion. Dr. Saha, over to you.
Thank you, Karuna. I hope my voice is clear. I'm audible.
Yes.
Yes. Great. So may I request all the panelists to switch on their cameras? Sharadji, yourself. Great. So good morning to all of you. And this is going to be a panel discussion. So we have intended to keep it interactive. And I just want to highlight one thing for the benefit of all the audiences, that this discussion as such is more on the subject of enterprise architecture and TOGAF as a generic standard. We are not focusing on any specific version of TOGAF. So the questions will not be pertaining to TOGAF 10 because TOGAF 10 is a very new edition. So obviously, we wouldn't have so many case studies and panel discussions around that. All right. So as Karuna was introducing, we have three distinguished panelists today, representing their respective organizations, one coming from the government, two from the private sector, but very large conglomerates. They also represent different sectors. So let's start with, with the first question, which I think is a very common question that we typically get whenever we talk of enterprise architecture as a discipline, is that what has been your organization's journey to adopt enterprise architecture as a discipline? I mean, how did it get triggered? What were the motivations? What was the purpose you were trying to achieve within the organization? What steps have you taken to institutionalize? So these are some of the questions that typically come up. So that's what I want to ask. So let's start with Sharadji first.
Thank you, Pallav, for that question. That is a very relevant question. And it is a very interesting from the railways perspective, because the journey for railways started in 2016, when we realized that a very large number of our applications, we had reached a stage where you are already aware of Indian Railways IT applications. I think everybody here will be aware. They started with things like ticketing for passengers, and then they moved on to train operations, freight management of freight operations, and then freight invoicing, crew management. And within railways also, there are a large number of areas where a number of IT applications were taken up. And then by 2015-16, it was clear that unless all these applications talk to each other effectively, the need that is being felt now for providing our customers as well as our internal managers with a consistent set of information as they need for taking decisions or for accessing information about the Indian Railways. That consistency was very important. So the integration of these systems had become very important. So it started with that. And then there was a very large exercise that was done by the ministry, which was called One ICT. So the purpose of One ICT was to move towards a single platform, IT platform for Indian Railways. And that is when the centrality of defining the enterprise architecture came to the fore. That is when we realized that, yes, now we have to go formally through the process of identifying, developing our enterprise architecture. And that was a time when the government of India, in any case, had been taking steps in all other ministries, state governments also, to develop the enterprise architecture for their respective organizations and enterprises. Railways being such a large organization, we not only run trains, we run both passenger and freight services, but we also manage and maintain all the assets that we have. And we even manufacture some of our rolling stock. We manufacture our locomotives, we manufacture coaches. So we also have large construction projects to lay out the infrastructure that we need in terms of track, in terms of overhead electrification, signaling systems. All of these are they're expensive. They're highly resource intensive, and the whole organization is dependent on information flowing seamlessly across it. Now, the latest, as you will have seen, is that there is also the need to partner with our logistics partners across the country. Similarity ecosystem in the country. So there is a need for us to interchange information with them effectively. So all of these have come together, and then we realized that we needed a formal enterprise architecture program in the organization. And we adopted India Enterprise Architecture Framework as per the government's guidelines. And that in turn is based on TOGAF. So that is how we are firmly on this journey. Now, what have we done since that time? Just a short description of that. So what we did was that we realized that the first thing is, of course, to institutionalize the idea of enterprise architecture. So we created awareness. We created a small team in CRIS. Our own team went in for awareness sessions, then got themselves certified. So we have TOGAF certified enterprise architects in our team. And then we approached the ministry at the highest levels, and then started building awareness at the highest levels in the ministry as well. So we went to the chairman of the railway board, and we got a group of additional members nominated to form a committee, and then we sensitized them on the need for enterprise architecture, what it will do. And slowly we have got a very good group of domain specialists at all levels who are fairly familiar with what enterprise architecture is ultimately going to deliver. And that is, of course, is a roadmap. It is a blueprint of what we have now. It is a future state blueprint, a target state that we intend to achieve in the next 5 to 7 years, and a roadmap to reach that target state. So all of this with a bias towards the information systems. So because we have realized that any service that now we offer, that Indian Railways will offer, has a very large information systems component to it. You can't offer a service without a very complementary IT system flowing through it. So that is how we've approached it. Now we've also got consultants on board, and we have started the formal process of going through the ADM methodology, following India Enterprise, as I said, India, but of course, which is based on TOGAF. So that is how we have approached, and that has been our journey so far.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think one cannot deny the fact that it is hard to really put a kind of a border in terms of what a railways is. Railways is basically a service company. It's an engineering company. It's a transportation company. It's everything. It's basically the lifeline of the nation or nations who depend on railways. And one of the key elements, key resources that the railways uses is oil and energy. So let me go to Tiju. So Tiju, go ahead. Would you like to explain what was the journey that Shell took within the context of the question that I asked, the first question?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Pallab. Am I audible?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So, as one key thing is what we have come up with is what is called Shell architecture framework. Yeah, and considering that oil and gas industry is very vast and it has different aspects in terms of, if you want to split the oil and gas industry, we have what we call the upstream and the downstream. Upstream is where the oil is produced, and downstream is where you actually refine it and then take it down to the actual retail customers, right? Retail and B2B customers. So the information and digitalization across this portfolios are quite vast, and the key thing is how I define my architecture, right? So one of the things that we have tried to do is come up with a architecture framework, and that's very heavily influenced by TOGAF, right? And so we have come up with something that encompasses our business vision, that drives into our IT vision and strategy, and then that is underpinned by the architecture governance we build into the system, the principles and policies that we build in the system, the standards, architecture standards that we need to establish, right? And the governance puts the framework of my review and all those things. The principles tells me what and all architecture principles and policies I need to follow, and underpinned by the architecture standards. And that the entire thing then feeds into the actual architecture that we are building, right? And that architecture is pretty much influenced with the TOGAF model, in the sense we the way we have the architecture we have can be divided into three layers. In fact, one is the enterprise layer, one is what we call the segment layer, and then the solution layer, right? So the enterprise would be undercutting the entire enterprise. Segment would be a little bit more domain focused, but on an enterprise level. And then how do I take that and establish that onto individual solutions, right? And each of these layers has their TOGAF influence, right? So for example, each of the artifacts that we come up with in each of these type of architecture follows your business, the business requirements, your architecture vision based on that. Then how do I define my business architecture, my data architecture, my application architecture, and the technology or the deployment architecture. And the entire thing is underpinned by security architecture, right? And so you can now see the influence that TOGAF has on how we have defined my architecture layers. And this has been a journey over the last over more than 10 years, right? To define this architecture framework, get the influence from TOGAF and build it across the enterprise. Yeah, I want to say.
Yeah, thank you. Stanley, would you like to go next?
Yes, sure, Pallab. So it's a great insight from Saratji and Tiju. So I think we all do the same thing, right? So end-to-end perspective and stuff. Maybe let me try to dig in. Okay, so we are doing a similar things. Okay, we are doing almost what Shell is doing in a way. But then when we talk about institutionalizing or adopting EA, maybe let me dig in a little bit deeper. So apart from doing all this stuff, maybe I also see that there are at least a couple of things that's really prerequisite kind of thing for institutionalizing or implementing an architecture practice. Now, I'm not looking this as one big practice because we have multiple architecture services that we kind of informally defined. And it keeps evolving. Like there's some serious concern. Then we create define or reuse an existing architecture service. So let me give two important prerequisites maybe for all these things. Okay, because that's something that's also not available in a lot of materials. So the first prerequisite for getting a successful EA service or EA practice that to be implemented is there should be some kind of a serious problem statement, like what we saw in the railways. Kind of that should be a big problem statement. I call that chaos. Not even a problem has got a solution, right? It's easy to provide a solution, but it's not that easy to address the chaos. So this is what I've seen in all the services we have implemented. There is a concern or a serious chaos, and then we address that with this architecture framework. And my advice is there is no chaos, then maybe we should not even get into enterprise architecture practice. Okay, so that's the first thing. So now this could be different things that's happened in Philips. You know, it could be a merger and acquisition kind of a scenario, a strategic planning kind of a scenario, or it could be a business transformation, technology transformation. So we have addressed all these things with the architecture, putting the architecture in the front. But all of this, okay, that's another thing here. It's not like we do this after the chaos is in place. Okay, we anticipate the chaos and then then we start these kind of initiatives. That's also very important. It's not a post activity. It doesn't work. And another important ingredient, to adopt this kind of EA kind of a practice is an executive and leadership push. Now, if that's not going to be there, it's going to be, so all that we are doing is we are actually driving or co-driving a change, right? Assess to be and transition kind of a thing. And unless there is a considerable push from the leadership and steering from the leadership, it's not also a good idea to, get into this. So I think these are the two prerequisites for initiating this, EA service. Now, once it is there, so I don't know, we at least trigger more than one in a year. So once it is there, the way it works is now Philips is a kind of we have a lot of architects spread across, and so we get into discussion with these architecture stakeholders. We discuss, this is the chaos we are trying to solve, and what kind of artifacts is required. Do we need a collaboration map? Do we need a sun diagram? Do we need a journey map? It depends. Okay, and then we discuss on, so this is the first part. And if you look at these names I just gave you, maybe the names are slightly different, I'm not sure, but the source will be in TOGAF. Okay, so it's all there in our, but it doesn't start from there, but it's always referred, it's always there. And once we discuss this, then we will look into who will be creating it, who will be reviewing, approving that part of the governance and the ownership part of it. And also finally the methodology part. I mean, we do have a very robust methodology. We might have to tweak it a little bit, modify a little bit for this new service to be in place. Most of these structures are existing. We don't have to create everything from the scratch for every new service we instantiate. Templates, people, process, all are there. We just reuse them, and in few cases we do build some new ones also. So, so the real chaos and sponsors, once it is there, get the structures in place and then begin. That's the approach I think we take to implement it.
Okay, so I think touched upon a very important point, Stanley, and I will definitely dig into this. So what you're saying is that it does help if an organization has a crisis, let's put it that way, because you said it should be more than a problem, but it should be solvable. So maybe we could call it a big, hairy, audacious goal, that we would like to achieve through enterprise architecture, which is you did mention that it could be probably a prerequisite. And I don't think there is any question with respect to the executive and leadership post, because that's absolutely an absolute essential to be able to sustain something like the transformation that architecture brings in. And I can tell you that within the government of India, that Sharath was alluding to, one of the key motivations and one of the key purposes of establishing the India Enterprise Architecture Framework was the mantra "doing more with less," which means how can the government improve its services? How can the government improve governance using enterprise architecture, using digital technology? So this leads me to my second question. Since you already mentioned this, what is the primary motivation and purpose of your respective architecture journey? What was the push? Was it that you were trying to integrate systems? Was it that you're trying to manage vendors? Was it that you're trying to standardize a few technology stack? Was it that you're trying to create new capabilities which were otherwise not available without the adoption of architecture? So what was the primary motivation and purpose to start on this architecture journey? So Tiju, if you want to go first, it'll be good this time.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Pallam. So one of the key thing is, so a combination of factors that you said, but the underpinning thing is how we can come up with one language, and a reference model, right? so we don't get into a Tower of Babel situation where people are talking different things. Yeah. So that is the underpinning thing, and that flavor you will find wherever we look at different architecture. How I can come up with a uniform model of defining my architecture, and that goes in. If it's even if it's a transformation project, it's a new greenfield, it's a brownfield, whichever way. The methodology of defining the architecture is same, but it'll be adapted to what type of the solution that we are looking at, or what type of definition of the architecture we are looking at. Yeah. So the underpinning thing is one language. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So obviously the follow-up question to that, immediate follow-up, is, do you think you have succeeded as an organization to be able to create that common vocabulary?
To a good extent. That's one of the other things. Parallel to that is the Archimate also. So we are heavily now moving into Archimate as a modeling language, the architecture modeling language. And so we have now come up with a meta model which defines how that Archimate should be used across the organization, how that Archimate definition also percolates across the different layers of the architecture, the business architecture, my data, my application and technology layers, right? And how that meta model should look like. And that again goes to the one language theme I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah, that's useful. Yeah, Stanley, you'd like to add to this?
Yes. So my answer would be all. All of them. And again, I would actually reflect Tiju's point of view. So the framework is there, and then we face one of these scenarios. We want to build some new capabilities. We have faced merger and acquisition scenarios. We have seen transformation scenarios, IT standardization scenarios. All that we need to do is, okay, this is the scenario that we are now in, and then how can we adapt our framework to support it, and then build maybe some more new models out of that, and then start working on that and deliver it. So it's not one, but all of them. But then it depends on a little bit, here and there, but it covers all of them.
Okay. Sharath, any inputs from Railways on that?
Yes, in our case, in fact, I'd say that there has been a bit of an evolution, because it started, as I told you, we started when our requirement was to speak a common language, really, as Mr. Francis also saying. That is basically to integrate our different applications so that information could be interchanged internally within the organization. That had to be the initial impetus. But now, as time has grown and our adoption has grown, we realize that in the meantime, integrating with the larger community has become very important. Now, this has emerged in the last 2-3 years. That is building up a logistics ecosystem within the country. So that requires that all the logistics players should be effectively, seamlessly interchanging information and communicating with each other quickly to reduce delays in the movement of goods across the country. So for that, having an enterprise architecture has become a very important part of that. To achieve that, you have to have an enterprise architecture, and you have to have a enterprise architecture that follows common standards so that they can be enforced across the community. So that has become one big driver. And one way that we've seen it recently is that we as part of the architecture program, we set up an API gateway. And then as soon as we set up the API gateway, suddenly demands for interchanging information and integrating with our partners became very large. And because of the gateway in place, we could do a lot of API-based integration that we otherwise would have found difficult to do. So this is evolving. And then speaking a common language is becoming more and more important. And one aspect that initially we had not probably looked at was we were only working in terms of processes and process flows and applications and IT applications. That had been our thrust. But now we find that the focus is moving towards the data. And data, defining data, modeling the entities correctly, and ensuring that the semantics of the data are correct, that is becoming very, very important. And that is becoming actually the next challenge for us. which at least the TOGAF and India Enterprise Architecture Framework addresses. So those are some of the imperatives for us.
Okay. Now, one thing that which seems to be quite common in at least two of the three organizations, that you have been doing enterprise architecture based on TOGAF for multiple years. So it is very clear that it is a journey that an organization has to take. It is not something that you wake up one morning and say, okay, I'm going to do enterprise architecture. It's a project, it's closed, and then done deal. So because it is going to be a journey, and I'm assuming that you may have some of you may have taken the, I would say, advantage of external experts, but how have you groomed architects within the organization? What are the institutional mechanisms that you put in place? Do you have a internal learning and development group that focuses on architecture, where the senior architects groom and mentor the junior ones? How does it work? If you can elaborate that. This is an open question. Whoever wants to go first, please go ahead.
Yeah, I can take it, Dr. Pal.
Go
So
ahead.
one thing is, so the two or three aspects that we look at, right? One is the mentoring thing that you talked about, right? So we have earlier we had external mentoring programs, and also we have internal mentoring programs where we have senior architects who can mentor the junior architects, right? That is one aspect of it. And we also had tied up with some of these organizations to have external mentors as well. So that's one aspect of it. The second is we are heavily like what do you call working with TOGAF certifications. Yeah. So that's one of the most mandated certifications that we recommend our architects to take. And one of the key things that we have seen is even aspiring architects. So to encourage them to understand what the architecture thinking is, we have them maybe take a TOGAF training and then have them prepared to become an architect also, and then coach them to become to get into the actual architecture stream. So there are two or three things that we do, and it is really paid off, right? And the TOGAF certifications itself help to build that architecture thinking and mentality in the team. Yeah, just wanted to call that out.
Go ahead, Stanley. Do you want to go next on this?
Yes, it's a collection of mentoring, and so like I would remember like just before the pandemic, we had a huge TOGAF certification session. The thing is, architecture fora in Philips at least is kind of spread around. I think we trained on 40 or 50 architects in one go, so that the formal training is there. We have our own internal process, which is quite matured, and which covers how the architecture is built, and that's being continuously trained. And the mentoring is always that we have very senior architects in the organization. And it's a very informal setting, but then yeah, it works. So all the three certainly goes together, let's say.
Okay, right. Sharath, anything you want to add?
In our case, of course, we are still in the process of setting up the governance group for the enterprise architecture. But yes, we are very, very aware that it can't be a one-off activity at all, and we can't be dependent on others forever. So it has to be internalized, and governance, as I said, data governance is one of the very important parts. So data governance, we realize we'll have to create a whole set of structures for that. And training of architects, yes, we've already, as I said, our group, we are taking certified enterprise architects into our group, and we intend to continue that. So
great. So we have some baseline information. So now a very common question that comes is, we have spoken about frameworks, Tiju, you mentioned about Archimate notation. All that is fun. I'm sure you may be using certain tools as well, certain commercial tools to doing those models. So the question is, as an organization, how do you move beyond just doing the architecture to actually using it for, in the organization for making decisions? How do you make the architecture work? Because if you can show an Archimate model to a CEO, I'm sure he or she, unless he has come through the architect rank, is not going to be very interested to know about that. So at the end of the day, how have you made the architecture work for your respective organizations? Anybody
Yeah.
open? Yeah, go ahead, Tiju.
Yeah, I think Stanley, go ahead.
Stanley, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting question. I really like this question because there's a lot of difference between defining architecture and making it work. I use the word applied architecture. That's a kind of concept. Now again, and that's the practice we are also doing. So it's also quite inspiring to discuss or share this. So let's see. Let me. I can think about two key ingredients here. Okay, when we wanted to implement, well, we have a lot of very good framework like TOGAF and maybe a few others also and all those things. But when you wanted to make it work, apply it, I can think of at least two ingredients. I would say. Okay, let's say the first one is about the ownership. Now, when I talk about ownership, I'm not just talking about, so we build these artifacts, we build these models, we call the architecture building block, solution building block. Now we need to have a owner, a person assigned to each of these building blocks. And this ownership should be federated. That's also very important. There's no point in, putting everything in one team and then putting the ownership. Doesn't work. The ownership should be, the solution building blocks is across the organization, right? So if you take the business architecture, the solution building block of the business process or capabilities, that's spread across, and the respective owners of this has to be made owners of those building blocks also. So this is very important. Okay, the ownership part, and it's kind of missed out at least at least it's pretty well done in Philips. So that's one of the success mantras, you could say. So this is one. Okay, and the second one. Okay, let me also touch upon the ownership. Also should come across with along with the federated governance. The central governance is good, but the governance also should be as much as spread across the organization, not like one ivory tower of governance to happen. So this ownership, and maybe we should call that as a federated ownership, which is one key ingredient. The other one is about just in time the reference architectures, meaning the reference architecture. What I mean is the principles and guidelines and things that we define to take our architecture move forward. Now we can define it for like we have to have the vision, no questions. So maybe 5-year, 3-year vision is always there, but the specific guidance and guidelines and the KPIs which measure those implementations, those has to be short term. There's no time frame here. Okay? It can vary, but then it depends on how far practically can you control that. So this federated governance and I would say just in time principles and guidance. I think these two are very very key ingredients. I would say making a defined architecture applied into the organization.
Great points. Yeah.
Very. I think what Stanley says reflects into what we are also trying to do, right? And as Stanley also said, there's a perception of enterprise architecture being in ivory tower, right? So so what we're trying to do is how we can. So Stanley said just in time, so we call it dynamic, right? So dynamic architecture is what we're calling. So how I can come with more real-time architecture, which is close to the engineering team also, right? So we're going into a more agile model, right? And that's how I can adapt my architecture model to be more dynamic and be closer with the engineering team, right? So, and again, going back to one language, the architects and engineering is coming closer, right? How they can talk the same language, how my architecture reflects to my entire delivery cycle and is close to the actual development, design, and deployment, and completes the actual agile cycle, right? So that's what we're trying to do, and again, the governance also, how I can make it more peer review based decisions, federate it out, and all those things. Yeah, so those exactly those are things that are now a little bit evolving from an earlier model of waterfall type of development, right? And unless we do that, it's very difficult. And I see the TOGAF 10 has some inputs on that. I think I've not gone through it, but I could just sense that. Yeah.
Sharath?
Yeah, well, of course, our approach in this is we want to merge the architectural outputs and with the existing project cycles that we have in the organization. Actually, the railways has a specified annual project cycle. So our attempt is that whatever is the output of our architectural efforts, our architecture, our work packages that we define, they should merge with the existing system of sanctions and execution that are already in place. That annual life cycle is followed. So what will happen is that it is not that an artifact or a deliverable that comes out of your architecture, enterprise architecture, that has to be differently treated. It becomes part of how the organization is doing its work. So that is how we are planning it. And we have already, as I said, we had to take a couple of things offline double quick. Our API gateway, for example. So that we were able to do. And that is how we intend to approach this in future also. So that there are no roadblocks in the implementation part.
Yeah. Okay. I think useful points, all of you bring forth very useful points to make architecture work. And as Stanley was saying, to apply the architecture, because it is not enough. I think all of us understand as practitioners, it is not enough for you to define the specification, come up with a blueprint, but the blueprint needs to be put in practice. And the way, just to give you a little input and little insight from what is happening at the Government of India level. So the India Enterprise Architecture Framework is the overall reference architecture for the entire country. And as you know, I mean, obviously all of you come from very, very large, humongous organization, but Government of India is a really, really large, humongous organization. I mean, if you think you're a star, that's the Milky Way, that's the galaxy, right? And you know that constitutionally we are a federal structure. So the federated governance and the federal ownership that Stanley was highlighting to is actually built into the reference models, and that's what states and ministries are encouraged to do. That's one. Ownership is also built into that, because unless a line ministry like let's say the education department or the agriculture ministry or the health ministry takes ownership of its own journey, it doesn't happen. In fact, one of the success stories of the application of India Enterprise Architecture Framework, NDA, is the National Digital Health Mission. And the reason I mention that is because all of us have seen the benefit of NDHM as part of our, even the CoWIN certificate. Your beneficiary ID is your health ID. So I'm sure all of us are vaccinated. So you must have seen an application of that. So it's very important that two very important points, and that's exactly the kind of approach that even the government is taking. And railways is one of the arms of the government, if you will, and they are also, I'm aware of that. So thanks for Sharath highlighting that point. Now, one question that came up, which is of course a common question, is when you go to your let's say CEO or a CFO, let's put it that way, and you talk about architecture, they probably still see it as an IT exercise, some kind of a technology standardization or technology strategy exercise where the technical people are coming and talking about architecture. So how do you I would say communicate at that level? I mean, who does what, and how do you tell the benefit at that level, when the CEO is saying, okay, what benefit it is going to bring me? Are there any insights that you can share from your own personal experience? Anybody? Go ahead, open question.
See, mainly the thing is how I can show my value, right? So that's the thing. So first, from an architecture point, what is the value that is going to bring to the organization in terms of agility, in terms of digitalization, in terms of revenue, in terms of cost? So the value stream mapping is the most important thing that comes up, right? So then once that gets defined, and the architecture flows from that, right? So that's the key thing. When at that level of discussion point, the key thing is what is the value that architecture brings to the table. So that's the key thing that we try to, at least at that level, we try to depict. Yeah, my 2 cents. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tricky question for Philips, at least, because Philips is already an architecture-led organization. We have
that's great.
discussing architecture, and we have a business architecture process. Everything is in place. So it's not, but then I agree with Tiju's point, because I'm also looking back at how things are done in Ericsson, and it's so we have to look for opportunity. We have to look for opportunity where architecture could solve a problem, or and then we have to measure it and then show the value. And trust me, that there are a lot of opportunities, lot of there are different. We don't really only look at the strategic architecture. It could be a technology transformation. There could be a business change, diversement kind of scenarios. There will be scenarios where the end-to-end perspective is required, and the chaos is going to exist, and we have to pitch in, and then we have to show value, and the value is the most important part. And once it is shown, it's going to be a success program.
Okay. Anything more to add? Yes.
In our case, of course, we have consciously taken a decision that we will not, as all the others have, is not to talk technology to the top management and couch things in terms that they understand, because they have limited time. So you can't go to top management and start talking about technology and then tell them equivalents. So we try to couch it in business terms as much as possible. What we have, and we are lucky to have, is we have a big group of senior managers, quite senior, who are at the periphery, so to say, of the technology as well as the business. So these are people who are from the railways. They understand the railway business, but over the years they also understand technology. And these are the people who are actually managing the IT systems for the railways. So we have used them to further take the message of enterprise architecture and architecture to the top management in the railways. I mean, as all the others have also said, enterprise architecture, you can't have a bottoms-up approach. I mean, you can't have a bottoms approach. You have to have a top-down approach, but with limits. It can't be a top-down approach that you're trying to ram down people's throats. So you have to create an awareness across the organization also. What we have done is, we are trying to, we have got number of mechanisms. We have National Academy of Indian Railways, which has in-service courses for managers. We also have others for supervisors. Also, we have these training institutions. So we have put some of their curriculum. We have put concepts of enterprise architecture in that curriculum. We regularly take classes in National Academy of Indian Railways for enterprise architecture, just to get people in the field familiar with the concepts. So that this combination, I feel, is what is required to ensure that the concepts become embedded in the organization without too much pushing, and without too much overt sort of pushing, so that people become a little suspicious, or they think it is a lot of technological gobbledygook that should not be what it is perceived as. So far, it seems to be working okay. So we are hoping that it will become more broad-based as we go along.
Right. So that question was deliberate because, when I saw that question in the question and answer channel and the way it was worded, and, correct me if I'm wrong, usually it is seen as if CEOs are anti-technology. That is the kind of perception we have. Haven't we reached a situation where if a CEO may not be a technically oriented person, but at least if a CEO is not tech savvy, in today's world, you cannot exist?
Exactly.
I think we have reached that point. In fact, without mentioning name, India's largest private sector bank was barred by the Reserve Bank of India to take in new customers simply because their system their architecture was not scalable to take new credit card customers. I'm not taking names. I'm sure all of you know what that bank is. And I can tell you from the entire episode that happened over the past 2 years, the previous CEO thought it's a technical issue. It should only be with the CIO and the CTO. And then eventually it affected the bottom line and the top line of the organization. So what I'm trying to come here is that do you think CEOs have now realized that if the enterprise architecture fails, it means that the enterprise fails?
At least I could see that, if you look at the past 15 years, the way we were at one point fighting to explain what architecture is, management, and the current scenario, at least, what I see, especially in Philips kind of environment, and some other organizations also. So if the EXCO is not talking, let's not call technology language, but the digital language, the enterprise may not survive. I don't think they can. At least, so we have a considerable percentage of our leadership who actually talks digital or technology, whichever we want to put it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Tiju. You were nodding.
No. I'm totally agreeing with Stanley. So the digital understanding of the importance of digital is very much embedded now in the CXOs. That much I can say. Yeah.
So what you're also saying is that it is no longer so difficult to go and convince the top management, the CXOs, and even the board about the value of technology and value of digital. And Sharath, you want to add something? How does it work with the railways board?
Oh, now everyone is technology savvy to that extent. I mean, there's nobody who resists technology per se. I mean, from the top to the bottom, that is very clear. Structuring the technology, that is what the message that we are carrying. So when I say that we don't talk technology per se, what I mean is that we talk technology in ways, and as I said, it is more about the time that top management can give. They don't have to be convinced to use technology, but it's the time that you can get from them to ensure that they buy into what your vision is. And our vision is, after a lot of study and a broad-based consulting, I mean, within the organization, it is not that it is one man's vision. So how is that to be the entire organization to imbibe that concept and then be able to give their views so that we get a living architecture? That is basically what we want to do. We want to have a living system in place, like Philips has, or like Shell has, for example. Railways is large. It is a much larger organization than perhaps, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to comment on that, but the kind of diverse things that we do, we do many things. So the idea is that concept should percolate down the organization.
Great. So we've had a great discussion. I'm looking at the clock. So, obviously I have a lot more questions, but let me, being cognizant of the time, let me go to the last question, which is more of a summary. So what would be your 2-3 things that an organization do? What would be your advice in terms of, the 2-3 things that the organizations need to do to be able to, I would say, initiate and sustain an architecture program or a practice within their respective contexts? So would you like to kind of summarize your thoughts in this question? So Stanley, go first this time.
It's a very important part of sustaining an architecture practice. So one I would say is the culture that has to be ingrained into the organization. It's not a one how do I put it? One team doing stuff separately. There should be a culture that has to spread across. It obviously will start from the EA function or the central core EA team kind of things, but does spread across. I don't know, maybe like top 2,000 people or like that. I'm not talking about like 10, 20 people. I'm comparing with, okay, when I say 2,000, I'm comparing with the organization of 100,000 employees kind of a size.
Okay.
So that has to happen. The culture has to set in, and then there should be a lot of education and evangelizing the architecture ways of working across the organization. It should not be like, no, I define something, you follow it. So it should be a kind of it should be across the organization. Again, the same point I spoke about, the ownership and part on all those things. And when we get to the kind of a maturity in that kind of a level, if you look at, I don't know, maybe like, I think it's from Open Group only, there are some risks or of 13 different risks of EA, pitfalls of EA kind of thing. And if you try to compare that with these approaches, you could always solve all of them with this kind of approach. A federated, agile practice across the organization who will not wait for like 5 years to realize things, but short-term architecture and stuff. So I think these are the ingredients. Build in a culture, spread across things, and then have short-term goals and showcase value out of it. I think those are the things that we need to consider.
Great points. I think absolutely. I think it's important for organizations to, I would say, spread the knowledge of architecture. Not everybody has to be an expert architect, but at least the architecture way of thinking. And as you rightly said, that it's important to work on the culture, the evangelization, and if I may use the word democratize architecture, because everybody knows that you're benefiting from the architecture without even realizing that you're actually doing architecture. So maybe that is the kind of state that we need to be targeting. Tiju, your inputs, please.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think Stanley summarized it well. So having that architecture culture and that embedding that. So first is having an architecture practice. That's one key thing, right? And then having that practice, having a structure to the practice, right? My governance models, my architecture principles, standards, and that well defined, right? And having that importance of architecture, have that importance bottoms up and top down, right? In the sense, the upper management also should know the importance, and the actual development team, the engineering team, the people who are actually deploying it should understand the importance of architecture. Okay, and that goes back to evangelization and making people understand what that really the architecture is, the architecture languages, why we have this architecture, why we have this governance built into the ecosystem. Yeah, so that importance and things should be also educated. And then building the practice, right? So grooming and actually nurturing the practice and attracting people to the practice. That's another thing. And mentoring the people within the practice. So those are 3 or 4 aspects to look at, right? How do I set a practice? How do I build the foundation for the practice? How do I nurture it? Then how do I make it more bigger, right? And then have that awareness about what we are doing also. That's the key thing that I would think. Yeah.
All right. Sharath, go ahead, please.
Yes, I think they've said the basic things. Yes, culture is probably getting that culture and imbibing the ideas, architectural ideas within the organization. That is very important. And of course, creating the structures that will help to perpetuate the enterprise architecture organization within the enterprise. That is, I think, very important. And one very important thing that Stanley said is that benefits should be seen to accrue quickly. It is not that it is a 5-year project and then people just go to the ivory towers and then after 5 years they descend. By the time the whole world has changed, that should not happen. And for that, you have to actively work. And one good thing about the TOGAF framework is that the ADM, we were sort of initially following a linear path through the ADM, when we realize it really isn't linear at all. It allows you to do a lot of things in parallel, as long as they conform to the overall architecture, as long as they conform to the overall effort. You can do many things in parallel. And that is how probably you should proceed, so that you keep giving some work package, some output, some deliverable as you go along, so that the organization's imperatives you are reacting to. So these are, I think, things that you need to keep it going.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much. This is a personal, experience anecdote that I have seen, is that usually it is easier to convince civil engineers about the value of architecture. In fact, you don't even have to convince them. They are convinced. It's part of their culture, part of their education. And I don't know if you've had that experience. Railways has a lot of civil engineers, so maybe.
Oh yes, 100%, 100%. You are right.
They refuse to work without architecture. It is as simple as that, right? So architecture and design is ingrained in their DNA, if I were to say. All right, so we have come to the end of the discussion, the formal discussion. I think we've had a very engaging discussion. Some great points came out in terms of how your respective organizations embarked on the architecture journey, how you benefited from a formal framework like TOGAF, irrespective of the version that you used. Some very good points like the use of architecture to create a culture, to have a common vocabulary, understanding that it's a journey, it is not a one-off aspect. And I liked, Stanley, as you said, Philips is an architecture-led organization, which I think is the kind of approach that we should always be targeting about. And I'm sure the benefits of that is immense. And in fact, there are enough surveys around the world which do say that organizations who have an efficient architecture actually do well from any business metric. You may want to use top line, bottom line, ROI, whatever you want to use. They tend to do much better than organizations who have an accidental architecture which is not formally designed with any kind of framework. So with that, thank you very much, all of you, to share your thoughts today. I thought we had a great discussion, and it was very unique because all three of you come from end user organizations, and something that we wanted to achieve in this, because we do get to hear a lot from service provider organizations, but we wanted to get the other half of the ecosystem, if you will, also into the picture. So all of you represented that, and it was a great discussion. So thank you all. So Karuna, back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Saha. Thank you, everybody. I think this was quite an enriching session, I would say, especially getting to know how things are done at your respective organization. Thank you once again. So ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this program. What we will do now is we will take questions from the attendees. I've seen that there's been a flurry of questions already posted in the Q&A channel, and some have already been answered. What I would suggest is if anybody has already not posted their questions, please do it now. We'll have Dr. Saha will moderate the Q&A session and then direct those questions to the respective speaker and panelist. Dr. Saha?
Yes, I'm looking at the Q&A channel, and obviously I've already taken one question during the discussion, but I'm just looking at the questions. So one question which I find very interesting, and we actually touched upon that, is I want to define new service offerings. How can I use enterprise architecture and TOGAF to make that happen? Would any of you like to take that question? It's an open question. Have you used EA or TOGAF to create new service offerings, provide new capabilities in the organization?
Yes, the service is a very good word. Okay, can I?
Yeah, go ahead. Yes, please, Stanley.
So it's about how do we? There's two parts here, right? How do we use TOGAF, and how do we implement get a service in place based on that? So the way, at least my experience is to look at TOGAF as an umbrella framework. It's got everything in that, but you can't do everything. Trust me. But then there's a nice part here. You look at what is the problem statement or the chaos of that particular service that you're trying to address. And then you look for what kind of artifacts you need to solve that. Then you go back to TOGAF, look at the content session, and then, okay, these are the artifacts. Look for the meta model, look for a tool to configure it, and on all those sides. Then you look for the methodology part of it. To do those artifacts, you wanted like to follow maybe the application architecture part plus some business architecture. You don't have to do information technology, for instance. Use those things and build your own methodology based on that. The second part. Then come to the competence area and then look for the resources you would need and then establish the resources. And I think that's are the key ingredients. Obviously, you need to sell this if you're going to establish there's a problem, you could sell it, start delivering value, communicate the KPIs to your management and continue getting your money and then continue doing it. So that would be my.
Chris, would you like to add anything to this question?
Well, thanks for asking me. I think it's best if the end user community folks answer, which we just had. So now I'll give you my 10 cents worth. I mean, I'm assuming that what we're talking about here is business services. So what you need to, in fact, in everything, you need to come at this from what business need am I trying to satisfy? And then how do I organize to deliver that? So the statement of architecture work will be around that particular business problem or opportunity, and then delivering against that with a combination of business expertise and technology delivery. And that in terms of the way TOGAF is organized to help you with that, it's going to help you with the kinds of questions you need to ask to frame the problem statement, which was just referred to, effectively in order to lead you to the solution outcome. So it's a very general answer. The reason it's general is that because in each individual sector, industry, company, there may be a myriad of other problems that you need to take into account in that decision-making process, including marshaling your resources in the company or with your partners to get that done. TOGAF provides you with the resources in terms of practices to arrive at those conclusions. It's not going to tell you what the services ought to be. You have to frame that problem yourself.
Yeah. All right. I have a very interesting question, which I think we should address. Assuming that in large organizations, and all of you do come from very large organizations, including I gave you some anecdotal information from Government of India as well. Assuming that the EA journey starts with a department or a business unit, right? What challenges you face during the extrapolation of the architecture to the rest of the organization? How did you scale it up and scale it out? And what challenges did you face? I remember Sharad saying that architecture is a top-down. Does it mean that it included the entire organization? So I'm just kind of adding to that question. And Stanley, Teju, Sharad, please, we would like to have your individual inputs on this.
Well, in our case, as I said, it was top-down because, yes, we had to take an overall look at the entire organizations, the highest level processes of the organization we need, because naturally the individual units of the organization are doing, I mean, the individual functional units are doing different functional jobs. What we have not, I mean, we have not looked at the geographical spread of the organization. We are looking only at the functional spread. Geographically also, we have got units like we have got Northern Railway, Eastern Railway, Central Railway, essentially doing the same thing. But they have verticals. So there are 7 distinct verticals in which we have distributed the organization. And these 7 distinct verticals do different parts of the work. But being part of the same organization, they are all intimately integrated case. So what we have done is that we have looked at the topmost layer, the highest level of business processes for each of these verticals, and then proceeded down from there. So we have not started with one particular vertical as a start. As far as the overall look at the business processes is concerned, as far as that is concerned, but we do intend, and we have started the process of drilling down into one of those functions, which is the freight business function. So the freight business function, we are drilling down more, and we are we are trying to create a segment architecture which is more detailed, and then move down to a solution. So we'll do some solutioning for that particular architecture, that particular vertical. Reason being that that is now an organizational imperative to rework the processes there in view of the change logistics scenario in the country. So that is how we are approaching it.
Okay, all right. Teju, would you like to add to that?
Yeah. So making the team understand the architecture, as you said, like it's a little tricky thing. It's one example I'll tell. Like so, we were adopting Archimate as the common language we were saying for architecture, right? So there was a survey done. We wanted to understand how much the actual teams using the architecture, the engineering teams, understand that. So one of the inputs that we got is they do not understand much of the notations or what really Archimate means, right? So then what we are thinking is going to the next step, like how do we train them, like so they understand that Archimate? So having training sessions. So this making the people understand the architectural language, right? And what we intend by the architecture is very critical, right? And we have to take a pulse check whether the people are understanding it. It may mean having trainings or maybe abstract it to a layer that they understand, maybe have what we call ambassador packs so that the architecture is made it in a way that is consumable by the audience, right? So different nuances are there, which you have to take based on case-to-case basis. But as you said, it's very critical that the people understand what we're trying to depict through the architecture. Yeah.
Stanley?
Yeah, I don't have a very, so I think the question is like, if there's a BU, which is a business unit, which is doing an enterprise architecture, how do we scale it up to the entire?
Exactly.
I have
That's right.
a very good or a very happy answer, I would say. The one reason is that I have always worked in a head office, central organization, and that's one reason. But I've seen cases, okay, and but I noted a couple of points which Sarajji told, like you proceed down from them. It's always happening that way. But then the point from Tiju is very notable. One organization can certainly build up training capabilities and stuff, and then you can share that, and then build things up. But then, okay, anyway, coming to the point. So if it's a BU, what I've seen is if the BU has done a wonderful architecture for some reason, and if there's another BU or the head office who wants to build or enhance their architecture practice in that area, they will always take it. They will not start from scratch because it's already there in one of the business units. Okay, that's one. So it's not about scaling up. Maybe it's waiting for the opportunity. But another important point to note is if you're going to do an enterprise architecture for your business unit, it's perfectly fine because that's your enterprise, and you do that, show the value, and keep building on that. But scaling up across the organization, I think it's not going to be organic. It's going to be, you have to wait for it for the opportunity, and in case it is required for the entire enterprise, it will happen. And that's the way I see it. It's a stepped approach, not a smooth organic.
Yeah. Let me give you my thoughts. In fact, within the government, it was not at the central level that it all started. It started with the state. The state of Andhra Pradesh was the first state to do a statewide enterprise architecture. And to answer that question specifically, what challenges did we face to extrapolate it to the rest of the country? First is the 2 points that Stanley identified. Number one was the cultural part, because you go to any other state, typically they say, oh, it's a different state. Our cultures are different. Andhra Pradesh is Andhra Pradesh, Punjab is Punjab, Haryana is Haryana. So, that pushback does come. So we have faced that. And second is the leadership. Many other states and sometimes even the ministries do say that AP, the Andhra Pradesh state, had the benefit of having a very tech-savvy leader who really understood the value of architecture. So this is the kind of feedback and initial challenges we had to overcome. But eventually people saw the benefit because, as Stanley was saying, once you see one part of the enterprise providing a success story, whether that part is a ministry or a function or a business unit, that is a detail. But once you see one part of the organization becoming a success story, it becomes much easier for the rest of the organization to benefit out of it, because at the end of the day everybody wants a success story, right? I mean, whether you're from the corporate, you're from the government, you're from the semi-government, you're a public sector unit, everybody needs a success story. And so that's, we have actually seen that as a plus point, where you have a success story which is the sub-organization success story, which can be extrapolated to the rest of the organization. Okay, so I think we have covered all the questions, major questions. There is one more question, but we've already covered that. How do we engage better with the business? And I'm sure that's all, we've already covered that. And Karuna, we are done with the Q&A. Unless there's anything else you want us to cover, the stage is back to you.
I think we're good. I think this was quite an insightful session. Thank you all. I really do appreciate it. So what we will be doing is we will be sending the proceedings of the session to everybody along with the presentation text. So if there is anything missed out, you'll be able to have it post the sessions, right? So we are come to the end of the webinar. So I would like to say thank yous. So thank you, everybody. I want to take this opportunity to thank everybody in the organization who have made this webinar happen. And I also would like to thank in particular distinguished speakers and panelists who have given us a valuable time. all the attendees who've made time to be present for these 2 hours. Thank you for that. Now, as I mentioned, you will have all the proceedings and including the decks as well. I believe some of the folks did ask questions about how to be part of the AEA. We will send you the further details so you could just write to them directly and engage with them directly as well, right? I would like to close by saying that the next decade of technology and business challenges will require organizations to be more agile, resilient, and adaptive than ever before. So we have now arrived at a point where business strategy and business solutions are inseparable. An organization of every size in every sector face the need to establish agile ways of operating, which constantly adapt and change, right? And the TOGAF Standard 10th edition shows how the TOGAF ecosystem is adapting to this reality, growing with businesses to deliver significant value in the times of change. The new release has made the TOGAF framework significantly more usable by varied businesses while maintaining its core values of consistency, openness, and efficiency. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you have enjoyed the session as much as we have, and we would really like to have your feedback. And I would request and recommend everybody to look at our website to post your feedback. So with that, I, Karuna Malesh, sign off. Thank you and good day.
Thank you all.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.